This is Heritage Words, a podcast about the words we've inherited from our ancestors and the meaning they bring to our lives. Heritage Words is produced by the HUC Jewish Language Project, which raises awareness about Jewish ancestral diversity through the lens of language. I'm your host, Sarah Bunin Benor. Our guest today is Karen Skinazi. Dr. Karen E.H. Skinazi is Associate Professor of Literature and Culture and Director of Liberal Arts at University of Bristol, and soon to be Professor of Modern Jewish Literature and Culture at Hebrew Union College, and Director of the Lockheim School for Judaic Studies at University of Southern California. She's the recent past president of the British and Irish Association for Jewish Studies. And she's also the author of an amazing book, a monograph from 2018 called Women of Valor. And she's currently writing an academic book examining British Jewish and Muslim women's literature. And she's also writing a memoir that is currently titled The Nippleless Jewess, and a novel called Ness. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
So let's start by talking about your name, your names, English, Hebrew, and anything else you want to tell us about.
Yeah, so the EH, which I tend to use, are my middle initials. My name is actually Karen Esther Chana Skinazi. The last name is also a little bit interesting, but I'll start with the least interesting part, which is my first name, Karen. So I'm the second child in the family, and my sister, Frances, was named after my father's mother, Fortuné. And that's a very traditional form of Sephardic name giving, which is the first daughter is named after the father's mother, the first son is named after the father's father, and then you move on to the mother's side. And when they came to me, I guess my mother got the choice. She didn't have a tradition that she was using, and she told me that she liked the k sound. So Karen, which was very popular in the 70s, Karen, Cherry were some options, but Cherry sounded like a hooker. So she went with Karen, and I never liked it because I was one of 5 Karens in my school, in my grade. So it was so uninteresting. And by the time I was probably 8, everybody called me Skinny, which was like Skinny Skinazi. It was, and to this day, most of my friends call me Skinazi. It's just Karen. Now it has a very bad reputation, but it was just so generic when I was growing up. Now, the middle names are a little more interesting. First of all, they're also my Hebrew names. And when I say Hebrew names, never do this to a child. When I got to first grade, I went to a new school, to a Jewish school, and I had been going to public school for kindergarten. And I felt really nervous. It wasn't just normal first day of school jitters. It was like, I don't know anybody. They all already know each other, that kind of panic. And to add to that, it was a Jewish school. And so my parents said to me, they're going to ask you your Hebrew name. Your Hebrew names are Esther and Hannah. So you pick which one you want to use. And the pressure on a 6-year-old was overwhelming. And I remember sitting there were about 30 of us in the class, and the teacher, her name was Gveret Nativ, she went around the class and she asked everyone their Hebrew name. And I just sat there going, Esther Hannah, Esther Hannah, Esther Hannah, could not decide. And then I got really lucky because the girl right before me, her name was Cindy Rain. She asked her name and she said, Hannah. And I thought, perfect, then I will be Esther. So she says to me then, what is your name? And before I could even answer, she says, your English name. And I said, oh, Karen. But I guess either she didn't say your English name, I imagined it, or she got confused because after that, my Hebrew name was forevermore Karen, because Karen is a perfectly good Hebrew name. So, that is my Hebrew names. Now, in terms of where they came from, I've told this story to people before, and I find I get two very different reactions, whether the audience is Jewish or not Jewish. The not Jewish audience tends to be quite horrified by this story. The Jewish audience can find the humor in it. So Esther and Hannah, those were my middle names, those were my Hebrew names. And at one point, I said to my mother, "Why am I named Esther and Hannah?" Now, as I said, my dad comes from a Sephardic tradition. They have very strict naming policies. There's an Esther in almost every generation of our family. So my aunt is Esther, and my dad's grandmother was Esther. And if you go up the line, you'll see Esther upon Esther. So the Esther was a really easy and obvious one. And you name after living people in Sephardic traditions, which of course you don't in Ashkenazi traditions. So it made perfect sense that my aunt was Esther and I was Esther. But I said to my mom, "What about Hannah?" And she said to me, "Oh, you were named after Grandma's sister. She died in the Holocaust." And I said, "Oh, but Grandma didn't have a sister named Hannah." And my mother said, "She didn't? Oh, well, I'm sure there were a lot of Hannahs who died in the Holocaust." So this
Wait,
is a story that makes people very uncomfortable. Um, in fact, what she should have said, but I think she didn't even remember. Memory is not her strong point. I think what she didn't remember when she told me this story is that my grandmother's father was Chaim, and I was meant to be named after Chaim. But she forgot. And the truth is, bless my mom, she never asked my grandmother anything about her life before the Holocaust, into the Holocaust. She really didn't know the stories. She didn't know the people's names. I was the one who always asked all the questions.
I guess that's fitting for a scholar of Jewish studies.
Indeed.
And then, so last name, I said Skinazi, but you said Skinazi, and I guess that's because you're from Canada, right? Where we
That
say,
is probably true. I take any pronunciation of my name first and last. I don't discriminate. Um, it's the same as the name Ashkenazi or in Arabic Eskenazi. And we don't know the specific source, but the story is that, which really is not from my family. I read this at Yad Vashem, is that people with the name Ashkenazi at some point, probably about 1,000 years ago, came from Ashkenaz and went to other parts of the world. So mostly that name comes out of the Middle East and North Africa. That's the most, of course, it exists also in Ashkenazi places, but primarily it comes from the Middle East and North Africa. And it makes perfect sense. He came from Ashkenaz, that Ashkenazi guy. Oh, Mr. Ashkenazi. So somewhere in my very far distant background, and it sort of fits with, I've done the DNA testing and it always comes up 55% Ashkenazi and then 45 some kind of Sephardic, Levantine, Italian, and so on mix. So that kind of fits, right? That extra 5% probably came from Mr. Ashkenazi back in the Middle Ages.
wow, that's amazing. And so everyone who has the name Skinazi or Ashkenazi or Eskenazi is Sephardic today, right? Is that true? Or
I think
Mizrahi?
majority.
Okay. Okay, great.
There
Um,
is the Brothers Ashkenazi, and I do not think that is I actually have never read it, but I do not think it's a Sephardic story.
oh, good point. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. Okay, so tell us, you've been talking about being Sephardic, but tell us more about where your ancestors are from.
So, on my dad's side, his mother was either from Beirut or Damascus. He always said Beirut. My aunt to this day, my aunt is 93. She lives in Bat Yam, going strong. She says that her mother was from Beirut. So I believe that they knew where their mother was from. I only put the smallest question on it because I have her Italian passport, and her Italian passport claims she was from Damascus. And indeed, her family was from Damascus, but they were both Beirut and Damascus were part of Greater Syria. So I imagine there was just some movement back and forth. But we think she was born in Beirut sometime early in the 20th century. I don't know exactly. Again, there's a date on her Italian passport, but it's not clear how accurate it is. Um, and so her last name was Tawil, which means tall, which is like a bit of a running joke for me because I'm very not tall and nobody in my family is tall. But Tawil, and they had these amazing names. So she was Fortunée, she was the oldest, and her sisters were Angèle, Adele, Rochelle, and Victoria. And my dad's father was from Cairo. And as far as I know, his family was from Egypt through the ages, apart from Mr. Ashkenazi. And my dad was born in Cairo in 1935. So he grew up in Cairo. He had his bar mitzvah in Cairo, and they left in 1949. So that's my ancestors on my dad's side. And on my mom's side, my grandparents were from Poland. It's not Poland now. So they were from Eastern Poland. My grandmother was from a city called Lutsk. And my grandfather, again, there's some questions. My grandfather also might have been from Lutsk. So I've found his identity papers that say Lutsk from the 30s, but his family was living in Nischwitz when the war started. And Nischwitz and Lutsk are not so far apart, but at the start of the war, they were both Poland. At this moment, Lutsk is in Ukraine and Nischwitz is in Belarus. So that's, of course, just the borders moving, not these places being so far apart. Not clear where and when they met. There are different stories, but my mother was born in a displaced persons camp in Bensheim she was born in Heidelberg, actually. So the displaced persons camp was in Bensheim in Germany. But my grandmother, who was a Holocaust survivor, was very ill during the pregnancy, and they sent her to the University Hospital in Heidelberg, which is where my mother was born.
Okay, so what languages did your ancestors speak?
So on my dad's side, I think they spoke a lot of languages as you go back. French, Italian, Arabic. Uh, my dad spoke with his parents in a mix of French and Arabic. So I know we talk about Judeo-Arabic, which is a lot of Mizrahi Jews speak or have inherited to some degree, which is more of a mix of Hebrew and Arabic. But my family really seems to have spoken French and Arabic. And when I tried to pin down, did your mother speak French? Because Beirut was more French, and your father Arabic. No, everybody spoke in this mix of French and Arabic. But they were multilingual. So I said my grandfather also spoke Italian, and my aunt went to the American school in Cairo. My dad went to the Universal Israelite, the Alliance Universelle Israelite, where they spoke in French and they really taught. I don't know if anyone else has spoken to you about this school system, which was all across the Middle East. The French bringing civilization to the Oriental Jews. And so they really imbibed French culture and French civilization. So they spoke very fluent. And to me, listening to my dad speak to his sisters was amazing. So in 1949, when my dad's family left Cairo, they went to Israel. They went via Italy and France, but they ended up in Israel. And he was in Israel until he was almost 30. So really a good portion of his life. And did the army and so on. And when I was young, they used to write letters on those like very thin blue aerogram papers, and phone calls were very expensive and quite rare. But once Skype came into being, that was a real game changer, and they would speak for hours, and I would come and listen, and I was always very fascinated because they would speak in this very, very fast, very fluid Hebrew, French, Arabic, and English complete mixture that I felt like nobody else in the world would understand, that it was so mixed together. And you probably could pick out certain things like the English words would be modern words or technological words. They wouldn't say machshev, they would say computer, right? So, like certain words, clearly, my dad left in 1964. And I think basically words that were created afterwards or that he wouldn't have used before then were just in English. Um, it would be more Hebrew and Arabic, but French would creep in, particularly, I feel like, with more childhood things like counting, right? It might be counting in French. So it's this incredible mix. And then when I would get closer and start listening, it would definitely swing more Arabic because that was the language I did not understand at all.
Because you had taken French in school?
I had taken French in school. Actually, when I was young, my parents spoke to each other. That was the secret language that they would speak to each other in so that my sister and I wouldn't understand. My mother was a French major in university and a French teacher. And so they would speak to each other in French and we didn't understand. And eventually we learned it too. But yeah, they had this incredible way of speaking there. But my dad never taught us Arabic. It was, you know, it was a real rupture, I think. I mean, there's a double rupture. Of course, he moved to Israel and then he moved to Canada. And there are different kinds of rupture. But I think when I asked my aunt, for instance, did you ever speak to your kids in Arabic? And it's very different. You know, she raised her kids in Israel where lots of people came from this background. She said, "Are you crazy? I would never ever speak to them in Arabic. You know, that was the worst thing you could do." And and I think it speaks to the racism that existed in Israel at the time. Listen, we know that also Yiddish wasn't so well beloved, to be speaking. They wanted to create an Israeli state, and I get that. But I think it was a lot harder for those who came from Arab countries because they were aligned with the enemy. And so it really, really was not passed down the way that it could have, at least not in my family. So I think that was one really big rupture. Um, but the second bit is when my dad came to Canada in 1964, he was immersed in a very Ashkenazi universe. He even tried making my grandmother's gefilte fish. Like and he would use Yiddishisms, right? Sometimes not perfectly, but nonetheless, like that was just part of the culture that he had entered. And we had Shabbat dinner with my grandparents every Friday night. Like his parents, his mother died before my parents were even engaged, and his father was in Israel until, I mean, he died when I was just a baby. So he was very cut off, I think, from that culture as well. Although one of the things that he did in the early 80s was start a synagogue with his friends. And it was a mixture of, I called it the non-Moroccan synagogue. So there's lots of Moroccans. Most of them are in Montreal, but Toronto has Moroccans as well. And they have thriving synagogues and they have schools and they have, an alternate, smaller, but alternate universe to the Ashkenazi world that is mostly Toronto. But then there was this handful of people from Libya and Egypt and Syria and wherever else they came from, and they got together and they created the synagogue. My dad went every week. He was the treasurer. It was a huge part of his identity. It's still thriving today. My dad passed away 8 years ago. And it's incredible, it's incredible to see that it's still going all these years later. But I think that was the place that they came together, that the people of sort of similar cultures, everything was done in Hebrew there. And it was interesting because my dad married someone who didn't speak any Hebrew. A lot of his friends married women who didn't speak Hebrew. It was not a friendly place for those women. It was not a friendly place for us kids. We hated going. By the time I was 12, I started going to the modern Orthodox Ashkenazi synagogue down the road from me. And when we went, women were kind of pushed to the the mechitza, the divider was at the very back. You had, maybe a row of chairs behind that. You couldn't see anything. Most of the women couldn't understand anything being said. It was a men's club, right? It was something that was a way to keep the culture and the community and also camaraderie.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you went to the non-Moroccan Sephardic synagogue as a kid and then an Ashkenazi modern Orthodox synagogue. Let's switch to your heritage words. What
Yeah.
are some words that got passed down the generations to you from both your Middle Eastern father's side and your Ashkenazi mom's side?
Um, okay, so I have not an extensive Yiddish vocabulary, but I have a Yiddish vocabulary because that was the house I grew up in. When my mother came to Canada when she was 2 in 1949, and she spoke only Yiddish until she went to school. So until first grade, she was Ruchel Pesha. She spoke only Yiddish. She got to school. She learned English. She changed her name. Um, but all the years, my grandmother spoke to my mother in Yiddish, and then my mother would answer her in English. So we were always surrounded by Yiddish. And I always joke that my Yiddish vocabulary consists of the parts of my body and the parts of a chicken's body. And those were the important bits, right?
I love
Um, but one of the words that I picked was a Yinglish word, which is, or maybe it's just in my family, which is the word eggies, because we always used it and I still use it. And that's why I had to pick it, because I still every morning wake up my youngest son, who I still have to wake up even though he's 15. And I say, wake up, Momo, open your little eggies, are your eggies open? I can't see your eggies, right? So that was eyes. But actually, as I was thinking about this, that I had chosen that word and as a word that I really, we had all the henties, eggies, feces, all the sort of Yinglish diminutives. Um, but eggies, I realized, actually had another meaning for me, which is when I was very young, my grandmother used to get from the butcher eggies. We called them eggies, and they were little eggs that went into the soup. And they were not laid eggs, they were actually unlaid eggs from the chicken that they would take out, really tiny, and they would be a special delicacy. And I've never seen them I've never seen them probably since the age of 8, but those were also eggies.
Huh. Interesting. So eggies, the word is, like you said, a Yinglish word. It comes from egelach, which
Right.
is little eyes in Yiddish.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, when you wrote it, you spelled it like the English word eggies, Eggies. And I
I
think that makes
did.
sense. We think about words in relation to other words we know. Okay, great. So what are some other words?
So another word that I thought I would include was doa. And doa was, so my dad was, I'm going to say, a very typical Middle Eastern man who did not do any of the cooking or cleaning or childcare. Um, but every so often, someone would go to Israel and come back with a jar, usually a jar of instant coffee, which had been emptied, cleaned, and filled with doa. And it was his sister, my aunt Clara, would make it, and it was ground spices and nuts um, and the word doa means to pound, which I learned later, which is, so it's all pounded and made into this very kind of thick. It's not like a spice thin. It's like more thick. And we would put it on bread or dip things into it. And we would eat it so slowly because it could be years before we got another jar of doa. And I, again, a little bit like these eggies in the soup, I sort of forgot about doa, even though doa was years and years of my life, long past 8. Um, and I was in Bristol, where I work, a couple years ago, and they sell food on the street, and they sold Middle Eastern food. And I was reading the description, and again, I had no idea what was in Doha. So I didn't recognize it. It said dukkha. It was a pita with some kind of vegetables and dukkha. And I said, "Oh, that sounds really good. I have no idea what it is." And I bit into it and I said, "Oh my God, it's doa." It just has another name. I had no idea. So that was really exciting that it wasn't, I thought, in my mind it was a secret family recipe, but indeed it is a popular food that just lives under maybe not popular, but it is a food that exists and lives under another name. So that was very cool for me.
Oh, that's great. So did you also eat other Middle Eastern foods beyond that container, that coffee container of spices and nuts?
I mean, so little, except for in the sort of, I guess, the typical now Jewish, right? Because like not Jewish as in Ashkenazi Jewish, but Israeli food is so Mizrahi now that I couldn't tell you what was, sure, we would go to a restaurant called Jerusalem and order falafel, but that wasn't as a Mizrahi food. It was Israeli, right? And I couldn't tell you where the line would be crossed. But my dad, he would make hummus, right? Like he would make some foods. We would have halva in the house. There were foods, his foods. But, even I should say, like when we were growing up, we didn't think of my dad as Egyptian. We thought of him as Israeli. I think it was really much like, and still, if you ask my mom, she would say my husband was Israeli, and my sister would say my husband was Israeli. I'm the only one who became really interested in where was he from before that, right? And even, when I said he and his sister spoke to each other in this melange, you could hear the French sounds in the Arabic. You can hear the Arabic accent in the Hebrew. You can hear all of it in the English, right? So, like, truly, it was so much part of the way that he spoke and related to the word, the expressions that he used. But we always just thought of him, we called him Israeli. And I feel like we missed a lot because of that.
That's really interesting. And I'm thinking about the gender differences. People who grew up with a mother from a particular place may be more likely to get additional food-related words if the foods are central to their family, if the mother was the cook. But you also told me in advance that you had some Egyptian soup that you uh, know about.
I did. And actually, the gender difference is right there because I got that from my aunt. So it's called molachia, and it is, I don't know why, but it's called, the leaf that it's made from is called Jew's mallow. And so I interviewed my aunt to learn about, I mean, one of the big differences, I feel like I imbibed my mother's culture and I had to go looking for my father's culture. And so I interviewed my aunt and I asked her, what did she eat growing up? What did she make after that? Because I didn't go to Israel until I was 17. My parents never took me. That wasn't part of our lives. So I didn't see my aunts. I didn't eat their food. My dad didn't cook. But I asked my aunt, and she gave me a number of things that she made, including malachia. And I thought, I do have a Syrian market down the road. I wonder if they maybe sell the leaves from malachia. And they do. They actually had lots of options in the frozen section. So I bought it and I followed her instructions and I made it. I didn't love it, but I felt like it gave me a chance to sort of connect to that culture, that I felt was a little bit missing in my life. So I felt, a chance to connect in a way that's more, um, visceral, right? That's not just intellectual. So I wanted to include that in my words as a way of thinking about how we look for our heritage and look for even our heritage words.
Mm, beautiful. Okay, what else? What other heritage words did you inherit?
Um, I put on there howaga. So this is a word from my dad. I would say the extent of the Arabic my dad taught me was to count to 10, which is a very Egyptian Arabic. They sound differently. Like wahed is one, where the wahid in other. But anyway, he taught me to count to 10. He had these coins that he gave me from with King Farouk. So before he left, he had taken some coins with him, and would ask him like, "What are these numbers?" Because the numbers are written differently, and he would explain it to me, and he taught me how to count. And just a handful of other words. But one of them was this word howaga. And he said, he used it to say a gentleman, a real gentleman. So somebody who's a howaga is a true gentleman. And he said it with this tone of respect, reverence. That was like the goal, to be a howaga. And so I remembered it because there weren't so many Arabic words that I had learned. And it was an interesting one. It was gendered, class, and so on. And in 1994, I was on my year abroad at Hebrew University, and I decided to go to Egypt for a couple of weeks at the end of the year. And I didn't tell my dad because I knew he'd be worried and he would not want me to go. So I told my aunt. She wrote down in Arabic for me where they lived so I could go see their house they grew up in. And I asked people for some expressions that I could use. I wanted to say, like, I'm Egyptian. And they said, oh, Ana Misrea. So, okay, I learned Ana Misrea and a few other expressions. And I said, is there anything else I should know? And they said, well, when you get into a taxi, they might take you in circles and try to cheat you. So you have to say to them, Ana Misrea, Ana Mishkawaga. And I said, oh, I know the word howaga. Wait, what does that mean? And they said, oh, it's just a way of saying I'm not a stupid tourist. And I was really shocked by this because it's the one word I remember my dad saying was such a word of prestige. How could it become I'm not a stupid tourist? So I thought about this. This bothered me for a long time, and I told him when I came back, and he was very annoyed by this. I mean, he was very interested in the fact that I went and was fine and decided to go back himself actually at that point. But he was completely disagreed. No, I must have gotten it wrong. That's not what Hawaga means. He knows Hawaga. So eventually, this is a theory. This is not a fact, but eventually what I started to realize is that when my dad left in 1949, it was a really different Egypt. So he was born during, there was the reign of King Farouk. He was, the absolute power. My dad said he would ride around in a red car, red motorcade. Nobody else in the country was allowed to own a red car because that was the king's. And they had a very, that was the king, but really it was under British rule. And it had been under British rule, Egypt, since the 1880s. And it was less strong and more, and it sort of changed. They got independence in 1922, but it was still really under British rule. And it was until the revolution, which was after my dad left. And so this was, this was the colonial era, and the British at the time were the European, those were the gentlemen, not probably the French and other Europeans who lived there. Cairo was very cosmopolitan, but the people with power were the Europeans. And when I went looking later to see Hawaga, what kinds of meanings does it have? One of them said white European. One of them said Lord and Master. So I think there was, you looked a little bit frozen. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So I think the meaning really changed. It's not that the word is different, it means foreigner ultimately, but that kind of foreigner went from being a European as a term of respect to a European as a foreigner that we don't want in our country. Or I also read it sometimes gets used as a way of making fun of an Egyptian who acts like he's European. Oh, you're being a howaga, right? So it has a much more critical edge to it now.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great example of semantic shift or pejoration, where a word starts out as having positive associations and then attains negative ones. And yeah, I think that's pretty common. And especially, well, I mean, it sounds like this was a term that was used in Egypt.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that your dad taught it to you, that that was a special enough word, that that was one of the few words that he taught to you.
I know, it is surprising. And I'm not 100% sure why he taught me that word. Um, I think he was trying to explain to me that his family was very middle class when they were in Egypt, and maybe that was important because when they went to Israel, they lost that status entirely. They lived in the transit camps, the Mabarot, for 2 years. My dad was never able to finish his education. He became a welder early on, and he was a welder through my life. So I think again, to me, it has resonance about that rupture that happened in leaving Egypt.
Hmm. So you mentioned that you use the word eggies with your children. Are there other words that you learned from your parents or grandparents that you use with your children?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say that most of them would be Yiddishisms. Um, so, my grandmother would call us oitzer, hertzla, all kinds of these terms of endearment, bubala. But my dad would call us booba, which was more dull. But I've always used those and sort of sometimes if they're annoying me, I'll be like, gevek, which they have no idea what it means. It means go away. But, sort of that kind of language. I use gutkas. I never say long johns. Um, and I think some of them, my kids, I don't think knew that polkies meant thigh or had a different word until they were much older. But what I kind of wish I passed down was my dad taught us a children's rhyme that he learned as a kid from his mother. It's not in Arabic, it's in French, but he told it to us so many times that I memorized it. And I kind of wish I had done it with my kids when they were little.
Can you say it for us?
I can.
Thank you.
It's my bad French accent. Fin, fin. Ah, bien sûr, ça le sent. Que faut-il lui donner? Un chocolat? Un bonbon? Non, non, dit Fanfan. Un baiser de maman sera ma récompense.
I love that. And would you be able to translate it for us too?
Yes, Fanfan did his Fanfan is the name of the boy. He did his lesson well, and they asked him, "What do you want as a reward? Do you want a chocolate, or do you want a candy?" And he said, "No, a kiss from my mother is the best reward." So
Aw.
that and I should say I realized also quite late that he probably also translated other things that he said into English for us. So, he would say like, before you say something, twist your tongue 7 times. It turns out that's a French expression, right? So that was just one of his lines, and I have no idea where this is from or if he made it up, but one of his things was you have to eat the steak while you still have the teeth to chew it. So, I mean, some of these things, I don't know what the story behind them are, but I felt like, he also like Ezahu Ashir, what is line? Ezahu Ashir, um, this one,
Is it the one who learns from everyone?
the
Or,
one, the one who's happy in his lot.
yeah,
Ezahu Ashir Hasameach Bechalka.
yeah. He says that in English, or your dad?
No, that one he said in Hebrew. That one he said,
Hebrew.
Hebrew and English, both actually. So,
That's amazing. It sounds like you got so much from your dad. Arabic words, French words, this French rhyme, Hebrew expressions, the Hebrew term of endearment, booba, which literally means doll, right?
yeah.
And or actually, I wonder if in Hebrew that comes from the Yiddish word. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm not sure where that comes from in modern Hebrew, but you really got the richness of your dad's linguistic background.
Yeah, in a very kind of diffuse way.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned Herzele, just to translate, that's little heart, right? And you also said Gatkes, which is you said you use it as long johns, right?
Long
Uh,
underwear.
long underwear, and then polkies, thighs. And do you use that for children's thighs and also for chicken thighs?
Mostly chicken.
Okay,
It's
okay.
polkies and do you want the polky or the fligula?
Okay. Okay. So a lot of terms of endearment and food terms. And yeah, okay. What else?
Um, one of the things I've always been interested is in kind of mistranslations. I just think I'll throw out there. So something that has always amused me is that my sister, so my grandmother would always use the expression "K'nei Nahara," so like against the evil eye. But my sister always misunderstood this, and she thought my grandmother would say, "Oh, my Einakel, my granddaughter, Kanena Hora," right? And my sister understood this to mean, um, my granddaughter, little fat girl.
Oh, oh no.
Because she thought, like, what else would she be saying at the end of that sentence? It must be little fat girl. And I just always found that really funny that, like, because it was never translated for us, so you have to kind of make your own translations in your head. And I guess for her, that's what she must have been saying.
How did you know she understood it that way?
She told me, she would
Oh,
say it. She'd be like, "Oh, yeah, well, grandma's always like, oh, my granddaughter, little fat girl." I'm like, I don't think so. I don't actually think that's what it is. Yeah, my grandmother spoke to us mostly in English, lots of terms of endearment in Yiddish. Um, she ended every conversation with sei gezunt about 30 times. So it would be sei gezunt, sei gezunt, sei gezunt, sei gezunt. Okay, love you, sei gezunt. Okay, love you, sei gezunt. There would be a lot of that. Whereas, and it's funny because that expression, which I still use, um, I really think of differently, although presumably the meaning is not so different from gezinter hate, which I only say sarcastically, right? Like, oh, really? Gezinter hate, go for it. Even though probably they mean the meaning is probably very close to each other.
yeah. Well, it's the same word, gesund,
That's
right?
right.
But sei gesund, so it means be healthy, and it's also used to mean goodbye in Yiddish.
Right.
And so you said you still use sei gesund yourself. In what context?
Um, well, I guess I don't use it that much with my kids, but I guess I just cherish it. Maybe I don't use it so much, but I feel like it's part of my vocabulary. I feel like it's so integral to me. Maybe because my grandmother was so important to me. So it just feels like part of who I am.
Hmm. So how did your knowledge of all these Yiddish words and phrases um, help you or play out when you were studying the literature of Orthodox Jews in English?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, I think that when you read a lot of this literature, sometimes it'll be laced with Yiddishisms, but sometimes it's not so much actual Yiddishisms. But again, a little bit like the way my dad would translate these expressions, you understood that what they were doing when they are, I can't pull out a particular line, but there's a sense of a Yiddish structure in the style, especially in the spoken style. Um, and I feel like it helps you understand the worldview in a way that's really hard to if you don't have a deep understanding of it or a deep background in it, because it's the way that it shapes everything around it, right? The way that the language gets used. And I
Wait,
don't know, it's a really good question. I mean, I think
sorry, you
it's
froze for a second.
obviously
You froze for a
okay.
second. Can you say that last sentence
Okay.
again?
Um, I'm not sure what my last sentence was. I think I think it's something that like gives the sense of how people sound things out even without the actual words themselves, right? And obviously I don't have to tell you this, but even the kind of structure of, um, the kind of Imirza Hashem by you, right? Those kinds of mixed expressions, which I particularly love. I love those kinds of expressions. Or when people even say like, "Oh, I'm going to stay by you," right? Sort of that inflection, which is so Jewish, and I think sounds weird and foreign to people who don't recognize the structure that's there, right? So that's something that I think I've always been really interested in, that translation that happens. How does it sound in English rather than the sort of Yiddishisms? And of course, Yiddishisms like, I always say my PhD advisor, who was half Pakistani and half Filipino, but grew up in New York, probably knew as much Yiddish as like, I mean, any Jew in Britain, I'm going to say.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting. Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you are an immigrant yourself. You moved from Canada to England, and now you're going to be moving to the US.
I
And
am.
and that parallels your parents who were also both immigrants. What were your experiences as an immigrant learning a different, not language, but variety of your own language?
Actually, I'm going to say that this question is doubled. There's two varieties of my own language, one being English and the other being Jewish English. Because actually, British Jewish English is quite different from, and I'm actually, it's funny I'm using the word quite because the word quite gets used really differently in Britain. But I've had to learn Jewish English in Britain, which is really funny. And it's even things like spellings, like words that we spell separately. So bar mitzvah is written as bar mitzvah, right? Or mazel tov is written as mazel tov, right? So even like spellings of things, there's R's at the end of words that we don't put R's at the end of, right? Maybe because they don't really pronounce the R at the end, so they've reinserted it in places so when they use Yiddishism, so they'll say schmatter when I would say schmata, right? Oh, schmata is a word I use all the time too.
Wait, would they use schmatter only if it had a vowel after it? Like that schmatter is not good for you. No, just in
No,
general.
like pass me the schmatter. I need to wipe this down.
Wow. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so okay.
But it's really pronounced schmata. It's pronounced not so differently, but it's spelled schmatter, right? So even things like that, I feel like, and when we sent our kids to school here, so they went to Jewish school, we were living in New Jersey. They actually went to school, a Jewish school in Pennsylvania when we left the U.S. 11 years ago, and we wanted to send them to a Jewish school in Britain. And there is one Jewish school where we live, and we sent them. And the first thing that amazed us, so there was tons of vocabulary for us to learn, starting with pants. Pants do not mean pants. Pants mean underpants. You never say pants. Like that's a thing a kid has to learn in the schoolyard day one. But the other thing we learned really quickly was capel, right? So they came home and they said, "Oh, we need to wear a blue capel." And I'm like, "A what? What is a capel?" Right? It's just not. We would say kippah. Obviously, I know yarmulke, but I've never heard capel before, right? I've never heard that used, and everybody uses capel here. Um,
Oh, that's interesting. In
the
communities in America, it's couple. That's
okay.
sometimes for that same thing. But interesting that it's an ah sound in England.
Yeah,
Hmm.
capital. So not something that I've ever used before. And then some of the variations, I mean, I'm sure there's elsewhere, like I guess in any shul I've ever been to, we have the weekly parasha. My kids learn the parasha, but here it's Sedra, right? So again, that's just not the terminology that we use. The bar mitzvah teacher that we had for my kids, same bar mitzvah teacher for all three boys, uses the Yiddish pronunciation. So, not ta for all of the words. And I found myself correcting their pronunciation. But yeah, so part of it is also like the English is so foreign. I could write a whole book about how different the language is, not just words, but so many words. Every preposition is used differently. You chat to someone, not with someone. You do something at the weekend, not on the weekend. You walk in the street, not on the street. Like all the prepositions are different across the board. Lots of words are different. Lots of words that we think we know are not what we think we know. But yeah, but the Jewish differences have been really interesting to me too.
Hmm. Well, we're almost out of time, but I want to make sure to leave time for you to say anything else about your ancestral languages, community, family, anything like that.
Um, well, I just think I feel like really lucky to have inherited multiple heritages. So I said I always felt like I didn't know enough about my dad's culture, the language. I've been trying to learn a lot. I would love to study Arabic as well. But I just think, this is like in some ways the quintessential Jewish story, these ruptures. So both the sad and the good. I also think it's not that unusual. I don't think it's just because I'm a Jewish studies scholar. I think in our generation, there is this really big desire to learn more about that lost past. So I feel like it's not really a lost past, it's a past that is still inherited in all kinds of ways, and that we have this opportunity to develop in our lives, like what you're doing on this podcast.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Karen. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I look forward to working with you at HUC.
Same here. Thank you.
Heritage Words is a partnership of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Language Project and HUC Connect, supported by tax-deductible donations from listeners like you. I'm the producer and host, Sarah Bunin Benor. Kyle Elbaz Fingerhut is assistant producer, Avishay Artsy is editor, and Talia Ehrenberg is video editor. The music is from Maurice El Medioni's French and Algerian Arabic album Café Oran, featuring the Klezmatics David Krakauer and Frank London, courtesy of Piranha Records. This podcast is one of the many ways the Jewish Language Project raises awareness about the diversity of the Jewish people and the phenomenon of heritage words. We also have online crowdsourced dictionaries where you can find the words mentioned on the podcast. We post Jewish Word of the Week and fun facts on social media, and we offer free educational materials and exhibits that you can visit online or display in a synagogue, museum, or community center. Contact us about our live taping opportunities. Looking for gifts for Shabbat dinners and Passover seders? Check out our whimsical multilingual t-shirts, tote bags, stickers, and aprons. You can find all this content and donate, volunteer, or sign up for our email list at jewishlanguages.org. Thank you, merci mucho, soch boshi, rahmat, shukran, toda rabah, Ashenim Dank.